Missing 411. Unexplained disappearances in USA. The sun was setting over the dense, whispering woods of Blackwater National Forest in Maryland. Its golden rays filtering through the thick canopy created an eerie pattern on the forest floor. The air was cool and damp, carrying with it the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Jessica Carter had always been a curious soul. A 28-year-old park ranger with a deep love for nature, she often ventured into areas most people avoided. That evening, as the shadows began to stretch longer across the ground, Jessica decided to take one last walk before heading back to her cabin. Just a quick check, she told herself, though there was a slight tremor in her voice that betrayed her usual confidence. The forest seemed unusually quiet, too quiet. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by an unsettling stillness that made Jessica's skin prickle. She glanced at her watch. 7:45 p.m. Time seemed to be moving slower than usual. Her flashlight beam cut through the growing darkness as she followed the narrow trail that wound deeper into the heart of the forest. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet felt different, softer, as if she were walking on something other than solid earth. Stopping abruptly, she bent down to examine the strange patch of ground. It looked like ordinary soil, yet it emitted a faint, almost imperceptible hum. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the sound seemed to be coming from beneath the surface. Probably just some kind of natural resonance, she muttered to herself, trying to shake off the growing unease. But as she stood up, the sensation intensified. The air around her seemed to thicken, becoming almost tangible. Her flashlight flickered inexplicably, despite having fresh batteries. That's when she heard it. A soft, melodic whisper carried on the wind. Not words exactly, but more like a haunting melody that seemed to come from all directions at once. Jessica spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. The trees seemed to loom larger now, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. She decided it was time to head back. Yet as she turned to leave, she realized she no longer recognized the path. The familiar landmarks had vanished, replaced by an endless sea of identical-looking trees. Panic began to creep in as she tried to retrace her steps. But every direction led to more of the same disorienting landscape. The temperature dropped suddenly, sending shivers down her spine, her breath visible in the cold air. The whispers grew louder now, forming into what sounded like distant voices calling her name. Jessica covered her ears, trying to block out the maddening sound. But it only seemed to amplify inside her mind. Somewhere far away, a clock struck 8, though how she could hear it in the middle of the wilderness, she couldn't say. Time itself seemed to warp and twist around her. Minutes stretched into hours. Hours condensed into moments. Reality blurred at the edges, leaving her questioning everything she thought she knew. Then came the lights. Faint at first, they hovered between the trees like fireflies. But these weren't natural lights. They pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, shifting colors in a way that defied explanation. Blue, green, purple. Each hue seemed to affect her differently, stirring emotions she couldn't name. Jessica tried to call out for help. Her voice echoed strangely, distorted as if traveling through water. The lights moved closer now, surrounding her in a circle. Their glow illuminated the forest in an otherworldly fashion, casting long, dancing shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. Her last conscious thought was of her younger brother, Michael. She remembered the promise she'd made him years ago to never go wandering alone in the woods after dark. Now, here she was, breaking that very promise. The lights enveloped her completely, their warmth both comforting and terrifying. Back at her cabin, her dog, Max, began barking wildly. Scratching at the door, he seemed to sense something was terribly wrong. The neighbors who came to investigate found the cabin empty, save for Max's frantic pacing. They noticed the time on Jessica's abandoned phone displayed 9:13 p.m. Search parties were organized immediately. Volunteers combed the forest, calling her name into the night. Helicopters scanned the area from above. Yet not a single trace of Jessica Carter was ever found. Just like the dozens of others who had disappeared in similar circumstances throughout the United States. The case remains unsolved to this day. Some theorize alien abduction, others suggest supernatural forces at play. But for those who knew Jessica, the truth doesn't matter. What matters is that another person has vanished without a trace from Blackwater National Forest. Another statistic in the growing list of unexplained disappearances known simply as Missing 411. As the years have passed, the forest seems to grow quieter. Visitors report feeling watched. Equipment malfunctions inexplicably. And occasionally, someone swears they hear a woman's voice calling for help on the wind. Could it be Jessica, or perhaps one of the many others who have gone missing? The authorities warn visitors to stay on marked trails, to never venture into the forest alone, especially after dark. Yet warnings can only do so much against forces we don't understand. Forces that seem to target specific individuals. Forces that operate according to patterns we're only beginning to recognize. In the end, all we're left with are questions, and the haunting knowledge that somewhere within America's vast wilderness, people continue to vanish without explanation, leaving behind only echoes of their presence, and families searching for answers that may never come. The forest waits, silent, patient, watching, waiting for its next victim, or perhaps its next visitor. Who knows which it will be? Only time will tell, and even then, maybe not even time knows for sure. Bigfoot secrets behind American forests. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon as the group of 5 friends gathered at the edge of the vast Blackwater forest in rural Oregon. The air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth. It was late October, a time when the nights grew longer and the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly across the forest floor. The group consisted of Mark, an adventurous college student who loved exploring the unknown. Jake, his best friend and photography enthusiast, always eager to capture the perfect shot. Emily, a biology major fascinated by wildlife. Tom, a quiet but observant hiker with years of experience in these woods. And Lisa, the cautious one who often voiced her concerns about venturing too far into uncharted territory. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Lisa asked hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly as she glanced around at the towering trees that seemed to close in on them. "I mean, we're talking about Blackwater Forest. You've heard the stories, right?" Mark chuckled nervously, trying to mask his own unease. "Come on, Lisa. Those are just old tales meant to scare tourists away. There's nothing out here except bears and maybe some cougars. Besides, we're all sticking together. What could possibly go wrong?" As they entered the forest, the golden hues of twilight gave way to deepening shadows. The canopy above was dense, filtering out most of the remaining sunlight and casting long, eerie silhouettes on the ground. The crunch of leaves underfoot echoed through the stillness, accompanied by the occasional rustling of small animals scurrying through the underbrush. It wasn't until they reached the clearing about an hour later that things began to feel truly unsettling. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches twisting upward like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Around the base of the tree were strange markings carved into the bark, symbols that none of them could identify. "What do you think these mean?" Emily whispered, running her fingers lightly over the grooves. Her voice carried a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Tom squinted at the markings, tilting his head as if trying to decipher their meaning. "I've never seen anything like them before," he admitted finally, "but I wouldn't touch them if I were you. Some native tribes consider certain forests sacred, and disturbing even the smallest thing can be disrespectful." Jake, meanwhile, had been snapping photos of everything: the tree, the markings, even the expressions on his friends' faces. As he reviewed the images on his camera screen, something caught his eye. A faint blur in the background of one picture looked almost human-like, though impossibly tall and covered in fur. "Guys, check this out," he said, holding up the camera so everyone could see. His tone was cautious, tinged with disbelief. Lisa gasped audibly. "Is that what I think it is?" Before anyone could respond, a low growl reverberated through the clearing, causing every hair on their bodies to stand on end. They froze, hearts pounding as they scanned the surrounding woods for any sign of movement. Then came the sound. Heavy footsteps thudding against the forest floor, growing louder with each passing second. Without thinking, the group bolted back toward the trail they'd come from, adrenaline fueling their desperate sprint. Branches whipped against their faces, roots tripped their feet, but they didn't dare slow down. Behind them, the growls continued, closer now, more menacing. After what felt like an eternity, they stumbled into another part of the forest where moonlight filtered weakly through the canopy. Here, they stopped to catch their breath, ears straining for any indication of pursuit. For several minutes, there was nothing but silence, oppressive, suffocating silence. "It's gone," Lisa whispered shakily, clutching her arms around herself. "Whatever it was, it's gone." But Mark wasn't convinced. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see those massive, shadowy figures looming behind them. And then, without warning, the ground beneath them began to tremble ever so slightly. "What's happening?" Emily cried out, panic rising in her voice. Tom grabbed her arm, pulling her closer to the group. "We need to keep moving. Now." They pressed onward, following the dim glow of their flashlights as they navigated deeper into the heart of the forest. Time seemed to lose all meaning as hours passed in a blur of fear and exhaustion. At some point, they realized they were lost, completely disoriented amidst the endless sea of trees. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they found themselves standing at the edge of a ravine. Below them stretched a dark, murky river winding its way through jagged rocks and fallen timber. On the opposite bank stood a figure, enormous, muscular, and covered in thick, matted hair. Its eyes locked onto theirs, burning with an intelligence that sent chills racing down their spines. For what felt like an eternity, they stared at each other, predator and prey frozen in a silent standoff. Slowly, deliberately, the creature turned and disappeared into the depths of the forest, leaving the group shaken but alive. Days later, after finding their way back to civilization, they vowed never to speak of what happened in Blackwater Forest. But late at night, when sleep eluded them and shadows danced across the walls of their bedrooms, they couldn't help but wonder, was it really over? Or was Bigfoot simply waiting for the next unwary traveler to wander into his domain? Vanished without trace in national parks. It was a crisp autumn morning when Emily Carter, a 27-year-old hiker from Colorado Springs, decided to embark on an early morning adventure in the heart of Rocky Mountain National Park. The sun had just begun its ascent over the jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the dense pine forests and alpine meadows. Her plan was simple: a day-long trek along the popular Emerald Lake Trail, one of the most scenic routes in the park. She packed her essentials, water, snacks, a map, and her favorite camera to capture the breathtaking views. Little did she know that this seemingly ordinary hike would lead to an unsolved mystery that still haunts the park rangers and visitors alike. Emily started her journey at the Bear Lake Trailhead at precisely 6:45 a.m. The air was cool and refreshing, carrying with it the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. Birds chirped melodiously as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the canopy above. Everything seemed perfect for a peaceful day in nature. At around 8:15 a.m., she crossed paths with another hiker, Mark Thompson, who later reported seeing her heading towards the Nymph Lake Junction. They exchanged brief pleasantries about the trail conditions before parting ways. The weather began to shift subtly around mid-morning. While most hikers noticed nothing unusual, those familiar with the area could sense the change in atmospheric pressure. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves in an almost rhythmic pattern that some might find unsettling. Emily reached Emerald Lake by 10:30 a.m. according to her last social media update. The photograph she posted showed the stunning turquoise waters surrounded by golden aspen trees, with the towering peaks reflected perfectly on the surface. What happened next remains a mystery. Park officials received no further communication from Emily after her lunch break near the lake. Rangers discovered her abandoned backpack near the Glacier Gorge Trail Junction around 3:00 p.m. containing all her supplies except for her camera. The device was found nearby, but its memory card had been mysteriously erased. Search and rescue teams scoured the area for days, employing drones, tracking dogs, and volunteer search parties. Yet, despite their best efforts, not a single trace of Emily was ever found. Local legends whisper of an ancient curse that guards these mountains. Elders from nearby Native American tribes speak of a spirit known as the Vanisher, said to appear during certain celestial alignments. This particular alignment occurred on the night Emily disappeared, coinciding with a rare lunar eclipse visible only in this region. Some witnesses reported hearing eerie whispers carried by the wind in the days following her disappearance, though none could understand the words clearly. As months turned into years, theories emerged ranging from plausible explanations to supernatural possibilities. Could she have fallen victim to wildlife, or perhaps disoriented by sudden weather changes? Others suggest more sinister forces at play, pointing to unexplained footprints found far off the main trails leading into unknown territories. Each theory adds another layer to the puzzle, yet none provide definitive answers. Today, the trail where Emily vanished continues to attract curious souls seeking either adventure or closure. Hikers often report feeling watched, even when alone in the wilderness. Some claim to hear faint laughter echoing through the valleys at dawn, while others notice their cameras malfunctioning inexplicably in specific locations. Despite these phenomena, the official case remains open, classified simply as missing presumed lost in the wilderness. Pause here for reflection. Think about how easily we can disappear without a trace in such vast expanses of untamed land. Consider the countless stories like Emily's that dot our national parks histories. And remember, next time you venture into the great outdoors, to tread lightly and respectfully, for who knows what ancient forces may still linger, watching silently from the shadows. Let the silence settle briefly before continuing. Imagine standing exactly where Emily stood that fateful morning, feeling the same crisp air brushing against your face. Picture the vibrant colors of fall surrounding you, then allow your mind to wander into the possibilities of what might truly dwell within these majestic yet mysterious landscapes. This is merely one story among many, yet each carries its own weight of unanswered questions and lingering fears. As we continue exploring these natural wonders, perhaps we should also consider the deeper connections between humanity and the wild spaces we so often take for granted. After all, the line between reality and legend becomes increasingly blurred when faced with evidence that defies conventional explanation. Mysterious USA disappearances linked to Bigfoot. The sun was setting over the dense forests of Washington state, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. It was an ordinary evening for Jake Miller, a 32-year-old hiker who had spent most of his life exploring the wilds of the Pacific Northwest. He had set out on a solo trek through the Cascades, eager to reconnect with nature and clear his mind after months of stress at work. Little did he know that this trip would become one of the most terrifying experiences of his life. Jake's journey began in the small town of Maplewood, nestled deep within the forested valleys. The air was crisp and cool as he laced up his boots, checking his gear one last time before heading into the wilderness. His friends had warned him about venturing alone into these parts, especially since there were whispers of strange disappearances in the area. But Jake dismissed their concerns, confident in his years of hiking experience. As he trekked deeper into the woods, the scenery grew more breathtaking, yet increasingly eerie. Towering trees blocked out much of the sunlight, creating a dim, shadowy world beneath their canopy. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and occasional bird calls, but even those seemed subdued compared to other areas he'd visited. A sense of unease began creeping into Jake's thoughts as twilight approached, and he decided it was best to set up camp early. He found a clearing near a babbling brook, its water crystal clear and refreshing after hours of climbing steep trails. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and the forest became eerily silent. Jake built a small fire, grateful for its warmth and light against the encroaching darkness. Sitting by the flames, he tried to shake off the growing feeling that he wasn't alone. Around midnight, when the fire had dwindled to glowing embers, Jake heard a low, guttural growl emanating from the surrounding woods. At first, he thought it might be a bear or some other large animal, but the sound didn't match anything he'd encountered before. It was deeper, almost primal, sending shivers down his spine. He grabbed his flashlight and scanned the area, but the thick foliage made it impossible to see far. Minutes later, another noise joined the growl this time, heavy footsteps thudding against the forest floor. They sounded too big to belong to any known creature in the region. Jake's heart raced as he realized the source was moving closer, circling his campsite like a predator sizing up its prey. Fear gripped him, but he forced himself to remain calm, knowing panic wouldn't help. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled slightly, followed by a loud crash somewhere nearby. Whatever was out there, it was massive and getting bolder. Jake considered packing up and fleeing, but the dense vegetation around him would make running nearly impossible in the dark. Instead, he stayed put, clutching his knife tightly while praying whatever lurked in the shadows wouldn't attack. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as the noises continued, each one louder than the last. Then, just as suddenly as they'd started, everything went quiet. The sudden silence was almost worse than the sounds. It left Jake's imagination running wild with possibilities. Had the creature moved on, or was it still watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Dawn finally broke, painting the forest in hues of gold and orange. Jake quickly dismantled his camp, determined to leave this place behind. As he walked back toward civilization, he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were following him from the trees. Every rustle of leaves made him jump. Every snapping twig sent adrenaline coursing through his veins. It wasn't until he reached the edge of the forest and saw signs of human activity again that he allowed himself to breathe easier. Yet, the memory of that night haunted him long after he returned home. When he shared his story with locals, many nodded knowingly, speaking of similar encounters over the years. Some mentioned Bigfoot, others spoke of unknown predators, but all agreed that the Cascades held secrets best left undisturbed. Weeks later, Jake received a chilling message from someone claiming to have witnessed a similar event. The details matched so closely that it left him questioning whether what he'd experienced was truly unique or part of a larger pattern affecting people throughout the United States. Disappearances linked to remote locations, unexplained noises in the night, and stories of monstrous creatures lurking in the shadows all pointed to something beyond ordinary wildlife. This revelation led Jake down a rabbit hole of research, uncovering reports spanning decades. Each tale varied slightly, but the core elements remained consistent: mysterious presences, terrifying encounters, and victims who either vanished without a trace or returned forever changed. The more he dug, the clearer it became that this phenomenon wasn't confined to Washington state. It stretched across the entire country, touching lives in ways no one could fully comprehend. One evening, as Jake pored over documents late into the night, he stumbled upon a particularly disturbing account. A family camping in the Appalachian Mountains described hearing the same growls and footsteps he'd encountered. Their youngest child disappeared during the night, leaving behind only faint footprints far larger than any humans. Search parties scoured the area for weeks but found nothing, not even remains. The case eventually faded from public attention, filed away as unsolved. These stories fueled Jake's curiosity, turning his initial fear into determination. He wanted answers not just for himself, but for everyone affected by these events. Over time, he connected with others who'd had close encounters, forming a network dedicated to unraveling the mystery. Together, they documented sightings, analyzed evidence, and pieced together patterns that suggested a single entitor, perhaps multiple entities, was responsible. Yet, despite their efforts, definitive proof remained elusive. Photographs often turned out blurry or inconclusive, audio recordings captured unclear sounds easily dismissed as natural phenomena, and physical evidence vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. Still, the group pressed on, driven by the hope that someday they'd find concrete answers. Years passed, and Jake's life revolved entirely around this pursuit. Friends and family grew concerned, urging him to let go and move on. But how could he? Every new report, every fresh lead reminded him of that fateful night in the Cascades, the night that changed everything. Even now, he sometimes wakes in the middle of the night, convinced he hears those same ominous growls echoing through his dreams. And then, just when it seems the mystery will never be solved, another piece of the puzzle emerges. A witness comes forward with compelling testimony, or a researcher uncovers forgotten records hinting at government involvement in studying these creatures. Each discovery reinvigorates the search, reminding Jake and his fellow investigators that they're not alone in their quest. So the hunt continues, fueled by equal parts fear and fascination. For while the existence of Bigfoot or whatever else may inhabit America's vast wilderness remains unproven, the impact of these encounters is undeniable. Lives have been altered, families torn apart, and communities left grappling with questions that linger long after the immediate danger has passed. As Jake stands once again on the threshold of the forest, flashlight in hand and heart pounding with anticipation, he knows one thing for certain. The truth is out there, hidden among the towering trees and shadowy valleys, and until he finds it, he won't rest. Hiker gone missing, found by Bigfoot? It was a crisp autumn morning in the Cascade Mountains, Washington state. The sun peeked through the dense canopy of towering evergreens, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. The air carried a refreshing chill that hinted at the approaching winter. This was the perfect day for hiking, or so John Carter thought as he laced up his boots and adjusted his backpack. John, a seasoned hiker from Seattle, had been exploring these mountains since childhood. He knew every trail like the back of his hand, or so he believed. His plan was simple: to conquer Mount Rainier's lesser-known trails over 3 days before returning home. Armed with maps, supplies, and an unshakable confidence, John set out alone, eager to embrace the solitude of nature. By midday, John reached the base of an unfamiliar path called Shadow Ridge Trail. It wasn't marked on any official map, but its rugged beauty intrigued him. As he ventured deeper into the wilderness, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the rustling leaves and distant bird calls. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as sunlight filtered through the trees, painting golden hues across the landscape. Night fell suddenly, as it often does in thick forests. John realized too late that he'd wandered off course. The once familiar surroundings now felt alien. Panic began creeping in as darkness enveloped the woods. Nervous tone. Every snap of a twig echoed ominously through the silence. Shadows danced eerily under the pale moonlight, transforming harmless rocks into monstrous shapes. Hours passed. Exhaustion claimed John's body, yet sleep eluded him. Just when despair threatened to overwhelm him, something extraordinary happened. A low growl reverberated through the forest, not the kind made by bears or wolves, but something far larger, more primal. Fearful tone. John froze, his heart pounding wildly against his chest. Then came footsteps, heavy, deliberate, each one shaking the ground beneath him. Moments later, standing just beyond the reach of his flashlight beam, was a figure unlike anything John had ever seen. Towering at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur, its eyes glowed faintly in the night. Bigfoot. Or what locals referred to as Sasquatch, awestruck tone. For several long seconds, they simply stared at each other. Time seemed suspended between them. Finally, instead of attacking, the creature let out another deep growl, this time softer, almost protective. Slowly, it turned and began walking deeper into the forest. Confused, yet strangely reassured, John followed cautiously, maintaining a safe distance. Over the next few hours, the mysterious being led him through winding paths and hidden clearings until eventually emerging onto a well-trodden road near dawn. Rescuers found John there shortly after sunrise. Shaken but alive, he recounted his incredible tale to skeptical authorities. While no concrete evidence supported his claims, search parties did discover massive footprints along the same route where John claimed to have encountered the legendary creature. Back in Seattle, John returned to normal life, though forever changed by his experience. At night, lying awake in bed, he would sometimes wonder about the intelligence behind those glowing eyes. Was it truly Bigfoot, or some otherworldly being protecting lost souls in the wilds? These questions haunted him, leaving a lingering sense of mystery surrounding that fateful encounter in the Cascade Mountains. Unsolved cases of missing people in wilderness. The dense forest of the Appalachian Mountains whispered secrets to those who dared venture too far. It was a place where sunlight barely penetrated through thick canopies, casting eerie shadows that danced unnaturally when the wind stirred. The story begins with Emily Carter, a 28-year-old wildlife photographer from Asheville, North Carolina. She had always been fascinated by nature's hidden beauty, often spending weeks alone in remote areas capturing images for her portfolio. One early morning, as the first rays of sunlight painted the horizon orange and pink, Emily set out on what she thought would be an ordinary expedition. Her destination was Blackwater Falls State Park, known for its breathtaking waterfalls and untouched wilderness. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. Birds chirped softly in the distance, creating a melody that seemed almost otherworldly. Emily arrived at the park just after sunrise. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a Lone Ranger's vehicle parked near the entrance. She waved briefly to the ranger, who returned the gesture with a friendly smile. "Be careful out there," he called out, his voice tinged with concern. Emily nodded confidently, her backpack already loaded with equipment. Little did she know, this would be her last interaction with another human being. As she ventured deeper into the forest, the sounds of civilization faded away. The only noises now were the rustling leaves and occasional snapping twigs underfoot. By mid-morning, Emily reached her intended location, a secluded clearing overlooking the falls. The sight took her breath away, cascading water tumbling down jagged rocks, creating a mist that shimmered in the sunlight. She spent hours setting up her camera, adjusting angles, and waiting patiently for the perfect shot. It wasn't until late afternoon that things began to feel off. A sudden drop in temperature sent shivers down her spine, despite wearing layers of clothing. The once vibrant birdsong had vanished entirely, replaced by an unsettling silence that pressed heavily against her ears. Emily glanced around nervously, attributing it to nothing more than her imagination running wild. But then came the footsteps. Soft yet deliberate thuds echoed behind her, causing her heart rate to spike dramatically. She turned quickly, scanning the surrounding trees but seeing nothing unusual. "Hello?" She called out cautiously, her voice trembling slightly. No response came except for the faint whispering of leaves swaying gently in the breeze. Convinced it must have been some large animal moving nearby, Emily attempted to calm herself. Yet, deep inside, instinct screamed otherwise. Night fell faster than expected, plunging the forest into darkness quicker than usual. Emily decided it best to head back towards the trailhead while daylight still lingered. But as she retraced her steps, confusion set in. Trails that should have been familiar suddenly appeared foreign, twisted somehow like they'd shifted positions without explanation. Panic bubbled within her chest as realization dawned she was lost. Hours passed, each feeling longer than the last. Cold seeped into every fiber of her body, numbing fingers and toes alike. Exhaustion weighed heavily upon her shoulders, making even lifting one foot in front of another feel insurmountable. At some point during the night, Emily stumbled across an ancient-looking cabin half hidden among towering pines. Its wooden walls bore deep grooves from years of weather exposure, while broken shutters hung limply from their hinges. Hesitant but desperate for shelter, she approached cautiously. Inside, the air smelled musty, filled with dust particles floating lazily in moonlight streaming through cracks in the walls. There was no furniture, no signs of recent habitation. Just an old fireplace in the corner, cold and lifeless. As Emily settled onto the hard floor, wrapping herself tightly in her jacket, strange noises began filtering through thin walls. Muffled voices carried on the wind, speaking in tones neither male nor female. Whispers so soft yet persistent, they invaded her thoughts relentlessly. Days turned into weeks. Search parties scoured the area, following faint traces left behind, a dropped lens cap here, a torn piece of fabric there. But despite their efforts, Emily remained elusive, vanishing completely, as if swallowed whole by the forest itself. Rangers reported finding peculiar patterns etched into tree trunks along certain paths, symbols unrecognizable to any known language. Locals spoke of legends tied to these woods, tales warning against wandering too far, lest one encounter beings not meant for this world. And so, Emily Carter joins the ranks of countless others whose stories end abruptly amidst untamed wilderness, their fates unknown, their whereabouts forever shrouded in mystery. Some say if you listen closely enough on quiet nights, you might hear faint cries echoing through Appalachian forests. Cries belonging to those who entered seeking adventure but found something far darker instead. Bigfoot sightings near missing persons areas. The dense forests of the Pacific Northwest have always been shrouded in mystery. Whispers of a creature known as Bigfoot echo through generations, blending folklore with chilling accounts from those who claim to have encountered it. In areas where people vanish without a trace, these stories take on an eerie significance. This is one such Talia-harrowing account that unfolded deep within Washington state's wilderness. It was late autumn when Mark Carter decided to venture into the woods near Mount Rainier National Park. The air carried a crisp chill, and the golden hues of falling leaves carpeted the forest floor. Mark, a seasoned outdoorsman, had heard rumors about missing persons cases linked to this area over the years. He dismissed them as urban legends until his friend Tom suggested they investigate together during their weekend trip. What could possibly happen? Tom joked, though there was a slight tremor in his voice. Little did they know how wrong he would be. Mark and Tom arrived at their campsite just before sunset. The sky painted itself in fiery oranges and purples, casting long shadows across the trees. They set up their tents under a canopy of towering pines, the silence around them almost oppressive. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and the forest seemed alive with unseen eyes watching their every move. Around the campfire, they laughed and shared stories, trying to ease the growing unease creeping into their minds. but then came the low, guttural growl that froze both men in place. It wasn't an animal they recognized. "Did you hear that?" Mark whispered, his heart pounding like a drum against his chest. Tom nodded, gripping his flashlight tightly. For several minutes, nothing stirred except the wind rustling through the branches above. Just when they thought it might have been their imagination, another noise broke the stillness, a heavy thud, as if something massive had stepped on the ground nearby. Their laughter turned into nervous chatter, each word trailing off awkwardly. Hours passed and sleep eluded them. At around midnight, the forest erupted into chaos. Branches snapped violently, and footsteps reverberated through the darkness, too loud